right. Hey, thanks for coming through. My name's Ted Elmer. I'm a payment specialist with EasyPay Direct. What we're going to be talking about today are the metrics that nine-figure companies are tracking that you may or may not be. Most lagging indicators with merchant accounts are the only indication we have that there's an issue with our processing. What we're going to talk about specifically are the lead indicators and the metrics we can use to try and anticipate those catastrophes before they happen. And so to do that, we're going to talk to these gentlemen here. So we have Brad Weimert, the founder and CEO of EasyPay Direct. EasyPay Direct is a credit card processing company that specifically deals with high-risk businesses to reduce risk, reduce costs, and build account longevity so that we're not playing the mid-flipping game. We have Darryl Hicks. Darryl has been an advertiser for 15 years, has sold to tens of millions of customers across 4 continents since 2002. His new, as of 2016, company, FlexPay, is an intelligent gateway built to help reduce decline transactions through a patent-pending system and machine learning algorithms. We have Adele, whose experience in the supplement space spans 20 years, from founding iSatori, leading that public through a combination with FitLife Brands, right? And since then, his newest venture, QuickBox Fulfillment, is revolutionizing the way, fulfillment is handled for e-commerce marketing companies. So we're going to open it up to the panel, go through some slides, we'll open it up to questions, and then we'll have some closing thoughts from the panel to take home with you. So without further ado, Brad Weimert.
Cool. We'll keep things pretty informal. Anybody that's got any questions, yell or something. I'm going to talk about a couple metrics or a couple basic things that we run into all the time that, as Ted said, change really radically as companies tend to grow. So we see companies that are in the million a year to million a month to a few million a month range, and as they grow, the metrics that they track transform. We do probably 25% of our book is Nutra, and the other varies all over the place. But one of the things we run into routinely are product launches. And whether it's a product launch or it's just a big promotion, the net impact of product launches is a mess with chargebacks afterwards, because you have a big spike in volume, and the month after you don't have the same sales. And so the ratios of your chargebacks get skewed, and it's difficult to manage. So we'll do a couple case studies that I'll show you, but we had a client come to us maybe 8 months ago that did a product launch, and they had lost their mid, so they needed help, which is what we run into all the time. They did $5 million in sales. They had $32,000 in chargebacks, which in and of itself is pretty awesome. So it's a really low chargeback ratio. The problem with that is that that's not how processors calculate chargebacks, which you may or may not know. The next month, they only had about 300 grand in sales. So when you calculate the chargeback ratio against that 300 grand, it's 11%. Now, first and foremost, you should be working with providers that understand the launch model or understand why this happens, and that will make a big difference. But I think hopefully what you've probably found out is that 11% is scary as hell for a processor regardless. So our approach to this, or one approach to this, is to introduce a different payment model for this. So instead of doing a straight sale on a product launch or promotion, we ran this particular client through what we looked at as micro-continuity or split payments. And so instead of doing one transaction for the product launch, every single buyer did a 2-pay. And let me preface this by saying you need to run your own tests, look at your own calculations, et cetera. But the impact for them was, instead of the 11% ratio, by splitting the payments, it brought it down to 0.25%, or the month after, 4.16%. So huge, huge, huge difference. You've got to run numbers on what that does for your conversion in terms of LTV, et cetera. But that's a really cool thing for a lot of reasons. Obviously a lower ratio, but the other is that it reduces risk both for you and for the provider. So if you have cash flow that's distributed from month 1 and month 2, the provider is going to be a lot more comfortable with that in general, because they've got cash to play with if something goes sideways in terms of chargebacks. So the takeaway there is, look at the marketing model, but look at the chargeback impact when you do your promotions, because that's real. You know, if you have chargebacks that are spiking beyond 1 into 2, 3, 4, 5, et cetera %, if that's your model, That's not a long-term model. So you have to do what you can to modify that. The other thing that you're probably tracking right now, in some respects, is rebills. How many people are doing trials in here? All right, so we've got a huge trial environment in general in the conference. Rebills, almost everybody we work with monitors rebills for LTV, meaning that they're testing their price points to find out how they're gonna make the most money. But what almost nobody does is looks at the impact of chargebacks through the rebill, and specifically tracks the metric of chargebacks per rebill price point. So we looked at a sample of 30,000 trials that had a $795 initial trial. The control on this was about $90. And if everything remained the same, as you increase the rebill, you had really radical increases in chargeback percentages. Now again, this is something you need to test and look at, but mathematically, if everything stays the same, you've got a low dollar trial, and then the rebill, as it increases in price, is going to skew your ratio. So huge, huge, huge thing to look at. But the big takeaway is, don't just look at rebill for how much money you're making. Factor in, I'm not going to say whether or not it's going to sink the merchant account, but factor in the chargeback ratio in general, because that's a big component to just longevity. So those are a couple takeaways. I'm going to hand it off to Darryl for a couple more things.
Cool, thanks. So I guess from our perspective, the most important difference between 80% of the businesses here at ADSum are in the 7 to low 8-digit revenue per year businesses. And the biggest difference between those businesses and some of our clients that we work with on FlexPay, who are generating over $100 million a year in revenue, is really the foundation and the walls, right? That's the focus that I really kind of encourage everybody to look at, because you can't scale a house of cards. And unfortunately, a lot of the businesses that we see out there today, that's really what they are. We have one merchant who's on FlexPay right now. They do about 15 million a month in processing. Over 350,000 auto ships every month, and yet they're running at 72 basis points in chargebacks, running continuity, because they don't do free trial. And it's a health supplement company selling pills. We have another client, there's a couple of them here. A lot of people think that pretty much everybody that comes to ADSum is running multiple mids, but there are clients sitting on Limelight who are processing $6 to $8 million a month on one mid. And they're running at 80 basis points in chargebacks, and they're also selling health supplements. So it's really hard. It's not easy to figure out, but it absolutely can be done. Even looking at our own business, we never really were able to keep our chargebacks under 1%, but they were always consistently under 2%. And the way we got them there was really by focusing on three things that I want to share with you guys, which is the same three things that we really see all of these other marketers who are doing 100 million plus in revenue in their companies. They tend to be focused on these three things. And I guess the big motivation for me is I wish somebody would have showed me this stuff when I was getting started 15 years ago. I had to learn way too many lessons the hard way. Lots of a road littered with broken, busted up mids and stuff like that, which Brad has helped me out with in the past, which I appreciate very much. But really, I hope that some of these takeaways can help you guys. So the three things, if you want to build a stronger business, is you got to learn to reframe, retain, and recover. So reframe, what does that mean? In building FlexPay and focusing on credit card declines, we did a deal where we get all of the card not present transactions that are issued out of 6,000 issuers dumped on our FTP site every day. 17 million transactions a day. We get to see every card not present transaction that runs in America. So we see Netflix, we see Hulu, we see Amazon, we see it all. Every single one of them. We got 140 columns of data per transaction, which we're able to model out. And I can tell you that there are a lot of people in the card not present business who are getting credit card declines only in the 10 or 11% range, which is really, really low compared to a lot of people in this conference, what they're dealing with. If you look at card present transactions, credit card declines are 2% across the entire Visa MasterCard network in card present transactions. A lot of people that I talk to at this conference, they think that their credit card declines are so high because maybe they're skewing towards a subprime demographic. But I mean, Walmart has a very subprime demographic, very similar to what a lot of direct marketers have, and their credit card declines are 4.2%. So again, why are the credit card declines so much higher here? Well, in looking at all the issuer data that we have, we see that they are punishing certain banks and certain MCCs. And a lot of the companies that are scaling beyond 100 million, they get to the point where they can work with a better quality bank, they can get themselves into better MCCs, and that's not going to get them down to like the 4% or anything like that, but we can see consistently that they're able to reduce their credit card declines 15 to 20% just by getting themselves in. So reframe to me really means once you find a way to clean up the back end of your business, you've got to get yourself into one of these banks, into a proper MCC where you're not getting so badly beat up. And if anybody wants to come and ask me about performance based on MCCs, I'm happy to share the information free of charge. You don't have to be working with me or anything like that. I'm happy to tell you we have all that data. You can contact me through the website, and my email is Darryl@flexpay.io. I think it's in the app as well. So that's reframe. Get yourself out of that point where you're being punished and beat up so badly by the bank, by the issuing banks. Retain is the second one. All these companies, these quality companies, are focused on better customer service. I mean, I run into so many people that outsource their customer service to the Philippines, to India, to Sri Lanka, because it's cheaper. Outsourcing your customer service, if you're doing continuity, is definitely a house of cards move. This is not a cost center, it's a profit center. Because anybody who runs continuity knows that 80% of the calls that they get in customer service are people saying, don't bill me anymore. So, back in 2006, we started to build out some metrics where we would study performance by agent. We would have dispositions by agent in customer service as well. We would look at refunds by agent with all the dispositions underneath of them. And we actually built a commission model for the customer service agents where they were incentivized. It was an alignment of interests between us and the customer service department, which we were then able to replicate even by outsourcing it to an onshore call center. The way that the commission plan works is the agents would get rated for their upfront retention on cancellation attempts, but there's a kicker 90 days later that their commission will go to zero if they don't have at least 15% of the customers they saved on day one still with the company 90 days later. So there's a 90-day stick rate that we're looking at, and it was a combination of the two that actually would get them the highest possible commission. So the customer service agents that were making the most money didn't necessarily have this super high retention number up front, but they had a pretty decent number up front. They had really good retention 90 days out. And this is how we got, absolutely legendary LTVs. Us and some of our clients on our platform who follow this model, we have the industry best lifetime values for anybody running continuity. Again, because of this focus on customer service. So track those metrics, make sure you're tracking everything by agent, dispositions. We look at chargebacks. We always wanted at least between 70 to 80% of all of our chargebacks to be what we call no contact chargebacks. So as chargeback data is getting inputted into the CRM, if you're not doing that, you absolutely need to be doing that, all of your chargeback data in the CRM, but you also need to be dispositioning it. And we had a rules tree, if this then that, where we'd go and disposition the chargebacks, which I can share with everybody as well, what we would do. And then you'd look and you'd say, if we got 70 to 80% of our chargebacks that are from no contact, that was a tolerable limit for us. The other 20% were coming from customer service or from the refunds department. But I mean, consistently, day in, day out, we saw on a $20 price point, we were retaining 45% of cancellation attempts. On a $70 price point, we were retaining 55% of cancellation attempts in customer service. So a lot of guys I talk to aren't even tracking that. They don't even know how much they're retaining in their customer service. So out of the get-go, that would be a really important thing to track. Again, I have a spreadsheet with the full model, the commission model, how we commission the agents, all the dispositions we track, how the commissions are paid to the agents, and I'll give it to anybody for free. If you email me and you want it, I'll give you the spreadsheet. You can see exactly how we incentivize the customer service agents, and we give that to all our FlexPay customers. So that's retain. And the last one, which is what FlexPay is working on, is recover. So understanding why credit card declines are happening. I always used to think as a merchant that chargebacks for fraud were my problem, that I had to eat them. I was surprised the first day I got on the phone with a head of risk at an issuing bank about a year ago, and he said, no, merchants never eat chargeback fraud, we eat the fraud. That's why we get paid interchange. I'm like, no, I felt like I was yelling across a chasm to somebody that is like, and we're looking at two completely different scenarios. So I went into my database, I exported out all the chargebacks I'd ever had from his issuing bank, this credit union in Oregon. that were for fraudulent reason codes, the chargeback codes. And I sent them to him, and I said, go look these up in your database. Here's all the auth numbers, the tokens, transactions, descriptors, dates. Go look them up. And he came back to me, and he was like, holy crap. He says, guess what? There's two kinds of fraud. There's a small subset of fraud that we can charge back to the merchant depending on what the customer says when they call us, but we got 2 to 1 ratio of other chargebacks that we eat. If it's a lost or stolen credit card, we as the issuer actually have to eat that. And almost all of their fraud is coming from card-not-present transactions, even though that's a small subset of their total portfolio. So what would you do if almost all of your risk and your losses was coming from one small subset of your business? They beat it up, they filter it, they scrub it, they cause all kinds of false declines. So getting all this data and understanding the pain points with the issuers, that said, there are some really good rules. Like credit card declines are, if you go to JP Morgan Chase, credit card declines are double at 2 a.m. what they are at 2 p.m. So don't send transactions at 2 a.m. Day of week, date of month is also really, really important. Understanding which banks, we talked about that earlier, which banks and MCCs, there's huge swings in chargeback ratios and in approval ratios just by that factor. And then testing, cleaning up the data streams. You get probably about 30% of all the declines that you see for do not honor are for technical reasons, because the bank you are now in a high-risk category, and they're going to start to scrub you if they see the slightest little thing they don't like. So it could be zip +4 or no zip +4. It could be the amount of characters in the address field. It could be the recurring flag, CVV and AVS flags, all kinds of things like that. We've recovered as much as 12% of credit card declines just by cleaning up the data fields on the gateways. And also, I should have mentioned this earlier, the gateway you're using is a huge factor. I'm not going to call them out by name on a recorded event, but if anybody wants to know which gateways get higher approval ratios or lower approval ratios, it's not massive swings, but you can see there's 2 gateways that are really common in this industry, and all things being equal in a pure split test, you'll see a 1.3% swing in approval ratios just by gateway. So that's an important one as well. So that's it, reframe, retain, and recover. Do that, you get world-class LTVs. That gives you an operation where you have profits and a margin to be able to invest into growing a better business. Every company that we see on our platform or that we've had experience working with through Masterminds who's doing in the 9 digits of revenue, those are the 3 things that they're doing. That's it.
Cool.
Good stuff, Darryl. Thanks. All right, so most of you are aware that the sexy metrics that most people look at, things like conversions on page, AOV, LTV, those are the ones that everybody looks at up front because those are the ones that drive cash, right, and sales. But coming from the world of fulfillment, we look at things on the back end, okay, which I feel are equally as important. And what I've found from most of our clients is they're not normally looking at this, but they should. They should be tracking these. So let's go through 3 of these. And I think we'll put them all together at the end to help you see why they'll help drive the business. But the first one is shipping time to home. All right, Amazon has done a terrific job of setting a new customer expectation for delivery, right? 2 days or less. Sometimes 1 day. I just ordered groceries the other day from our new Amazon distribution center. It's 45 minutes. That's unrealistic for most of us. But nevertheless, what that's done is that's set an expectation for the consumer, right? They want their orders now, right? So tracking time to home is critically important. So like most brands in the United States that are direct to consumer, 70% of your orders are probably going to California, Texas, Florida, and New York, right? So you kind of got the happy face in the United States. So you want, ideally, to be equidistant from those locations. Why? Because strategically, that means your time to home will be lessened, right? So QuickBox, we're located here in Denver, Colorado. Any of you who happen to be driving through Denver on your way out, be happy to host you tomorrow if you want to stop by and say hello. But we are located just blocks away from our postage carrier's largest sorting facility in the United States. We pick, pack, and ship 7 days a week, so that allows us to put those orders on a truck that night, headed for destination. Time to delivery in transit is 3 days or less for 86% of the United States, and those are verified dates and times. And for the rest of those 4 days, maximum 5 days in remote locations. So if you're doing fulfillment in an East or West Coast fulfillment center, it's probably taking you about 5, 6, maybe 7 days to get to the other coast. Now, once you get to about day 3, your customer is usually tracking online, seeing where their order's at. Day 4, they're starting to scratch their head. Day 5, phone calls are coming into customer service. Day 6 and 7, they're probably issuing a chargeback and they want their money back, right? So we want to prevent that, and you can do that by reducing time to home. So you want to be measuring that, and it should be anywhere from 3, no more than 4 days time to home delivery once that package leaves the facility. The next one is back orders. This doesn't get thought about a lot, but the reality is there's a lot of consequential damages to back orders. Especially if you're really trying to build a brand. I just came from 20 years of building brands, mainly in the retail space, but customer loyalty is everything to a brand, right? So when you're back ordered, there's sort of all these collateral damages that are caused by that back order being created in the customer's mind, right? So if you're always putting yourself in the shoes of the customer and thinking, well, what's this experience like for them? So there might be a delay of time in which their product ships to them, but they may not be aware of that, right? You may not have had a back order on the site. You may not have told them that there's a back order. And you're likely not split shipping, so you're just letting that order hold until the inventory comes in, and then you're shipping it out. And I've seen clients who've had back orders for, maybe a week and then shipping the products out. And I can just tell you that by the time that customer gets that product, they probably let buyer's remorse set in. They're not going to be happy by the time they get it. They're not going to have a great experience. And they're probably more agitated and more apt to then turn around and maybe want a refund. So you want to prevent that. You want to prevent back orders in your product supply. There's a number of ways to do that, but ideally you want to have 0 back orders. That's usually unrealistic. Sometimes you can't always gauge the volume of your campaigns or what's actually going to happen in driving order volume, but you want to try to generate enough safety stock to prevent yourself from going into back order. If you have a good demand planner, someone who really understands forecasting, plug yourself into Analyzer, something that gives you some foresight by using past data and knowing what you're doing as far as driving traffic to predict what your inventory needs are going to be going forward. Look at that demand during lead time from a production standpoint. Talk to your manufacturers. Work with good manufacturers who understand what you're trying to do. I'm so puzzled sometimes by the lack of communication when you look back vertically downstream to some of your suppliers and vendors, that if you just sat down and had a conversation with them and said, this is what we're doing, this is our needs, here's what we would like you to do, you can have a great relationship where you always have inventory available, or you can minimize that demand during the lead time and then have that product so that you can start shipping those back orders. The other solution that you can have is an on-demand inventory supplier. We do that at QuickBox. We supply product on demand. We keep 1 week advance inventory in front of your needs, and that way chances are you will never run out of product. But back order is very critical. You want to try to have 0, but realistically, if you can keep that below 1 or 2 days occurring any month, that's ideal in any given month. So cumulatively, if you have anything over 48 hours, 72 hours, you're probably starting to get yourself into some high risk of consumer being very dissatisfied. The third one, return processing time. This one is really critical, and I find that it's often not looked at all. And that's the time it takes once the customer returns the product to the fulfillment center or wherever the destination is, that return is processed, right? That needs to be done immediately, right? So any fulfillment center who uses rotating PO boxes and all that sort of stuff that I just don't believe in, and we don't believe in at QuickBox, what's happening in those instances where they might check that PO box once a week, well, what do you think happens when that product lands in that PO box and the customer got a delivery receipt, but you just checked the PO box the day before? 7 days goes by. By the time you get the product in, you sort it through, you log it, you turn the log file over, you key it, and it issues the refund. You could be at 10 days. What do you think the customer's done by 10 days when they know that product has been received before that refund has been issued? They think you're trying to scam them, right? So they're either calling in or issuing a chargeback right away. So you want to watch your processing of returns. Everything at QuickBox that we do, it's received in our facility, it's processed within 24 hours. We'll log that return. We actually provide a service where we can actually go into your CRM and key that return in, provided it's following your refund instructions. But we never let that go further than 24 hours out from a return being processed. And we do that 7 days a week. So this is a critical metric that I would highly encourage you to watch as far as on the back end. So if you look at these three metrics, shipping time to home, the back order status, returns processing, I would, if you're not already and you're using a third-party provider for logistics or fulfillment, I would ask them, actually I would demand that they show you this information, right? So this is something that I share with my clients each month. We do shipping time to homes verified by our postage carrier. We also look at back order status, and we've set up mechanisms to prevent that from actually happening or mitigate that from happening as much as possible. And then returns processing, making sure that that's tracked and looked at on a daily basis as far as what the returns are each day. And I would make sure that you know what each of these three numbers look like, and I'd watch them very carefully, at least on a weekly basis, if not on a monthly basis. All right, so this isn't just about reducing dispute patterns, this is about taking care of your customer. You know, one of the themes that Nate, Lynn, and I had before coming out to this conference, as we're all starting to feel the market forces at play and the shifts going on in the industry, is we have got to get out of this mindset of chasing dollars and start building businesses and building brands. And you do that by taking care of your customer. So these are just three back-end metrics that you can do to really make sure that you're taking care of your customer. Thanks, guys.
Yeah, so to kind of tie this all together, there are tons of metrics that I think we can all drown in metrics. And the reason that LTV is one that we all drive by, as you mentioned, is it's where the money is, right? And none of these metrics matter at all if you don't bring in sales. What has been shocking to us is how differently people calculate the value of their leads. So, you know, when you're buying ads, your cost per click, your CPM, your EPCs are all hugely valuable. But if you're not calculating your lead value accurately, you can be wildly off, and that has dramatic impact when you're trying to scale an offer. So what we see routinely are people that do something like this. They'll say, okay, well, we're at 200 grand a month in sales. Here are our refunds, so our net sales are 180 grand, and our lead value is $2.24. Great, but what they're not factoring in way too often are processing fees. And this is one example of a straight sale offer. So you're just one independent transaction for 74 bucks. When you factor in the chargeback fees, you've got not only the lost sales, but also the impact of the cost of the chargeback. And for a lot of people in this room, that's 45 bucks. It could be 20 bucks. But when you look at that, your sales aren't then 210 grand. They're not 180 grand. They're 166 grand. And the net impact there is that the lead value is closer to 2 bucks. So if you're off on buying media by 10%, do you think it's going to be tough to scale your offer? Yeah, totally. So we see people all the time that, and by the way, it doesn't mean that you can't. We see people all the time that do a very good job scaling, but they're throwing darts in the dark, and they're just hoping that it's going to make sense and happen. So the challenge with this is how you calculate the lead value varies wildly too, based on what kind of offer you have, who your demo is, and if it's straight sale versus trial versus continuity, how long the continuity is, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So we built out some calculators to help dissect that stuff. We put them at /ADSum, EasyPayDirect /ADSum. But Ted, who's in the front of the room here, is one of our certified payment specialists. If you have questions on that stuff and calculating them further, that's a easy thing that we can do to help the group in general. So those are some metrics that we think you all should be tracking. Hopefully that's helpful. And we'll open it up to any questions that people have. Do you have any other follow-up before we do that?
No, I think that's really good. I think the tracking of the LTV, factoring in all those costs is really, really important. It's really, we would always look at it, and again, we didn't come up with these metrics on our own, but in talking to some clients, there's a really great blog that was done by HubSpot where they talked about measuring your acquisition cost as a ratio of LTV, and they came up with a standardized way for everyone to look at LTV, and they decided really it should be gross margin. So taking out refunds and chargebacks, taking out processing fees and customer service and product fulfillment. And if you're not running a 70% gross margin in this business, by the time you back out all those numbers, you're going to have a really, really hard time scaling your business. So Every client that we work with and in all of our business, we were really proud to have about 73.7% gross margin
Roughly.
on ours. Yeah, roughly. Numbers geek, sorry. So yeah, about 74% gross margin on our products. And then you look at your marketing costs as a ratio of that gross margin. So we would always look to spend no more than 50% of our gross margin. So again, if you want to be able to outcompete and you want to be able to outbid, if you're doing a better job with customer service retention, if you're doing a better job with credit card declines, salvaging credit card declines, that's going to give you more gross margin, which allows you to spend more on advertising, which allows you to outcompete.
I like it.
Questions? All right, then do we have some closing thoughts to part company with? Anyone?
Yeah, I mean, for me, I think that the underlying message for us is factor in all the fees and factor in the impact of chargebacks. We have a huge group of people that juggle mids, and their business now, the business model has turned into managing merchant accounts. And that's a really rough business model. And it's also not sustainable. I mean, any way you want to slice it, it's not sustainable. So when you're calculating any of your metrics, when you're looking at marketing, when you're looking at anything you do, you have to look at the impact of chargebacks, because that will make or break the company.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I guess my closing thought would be, looking at the reframe, retain, and recover. I didn't get to attend the retention piece, but I wish I would have been there to hear it. I think we were kindred spirits in some of the stuff that we were looking at on that. But obviously the credit card decline piece is one that I've been spending a lot of time focusing on. We used to just take all of our declines and retry them on an intelligent schedule, try Fridays and Saturdays, use Account Updater, a few things like that. Now that we're using a machine learning system, we've seen across the board about a 50% increase in performance. So where we used to recover about 30% of our declines, now we're consistently at 45, 46%. We had some customers that were at about 38% recovery. They're now at 56% recovery of their credit card declines. So again, all that stuff kind of feeds into better gross margins. So that's I guess if there's one solid takeaway is, try to get a really good solid understanding of what your gross margin is and look at the different factors that go into it. Try to optimize everything above the gross margin line, all those COGS. There's such a huge return on that investment.
Yeah, I would say, I learned a long time ago in business that what gets measured gets done, right? So there's a lot of metrics that you can look at in your business. Is figure out the ones that matter to you and your business, right? The ones that are really going to move the needle. There's going to be some metrics that just don't do that much, right, in terms of a lever, but find the ones that really make sense and matter the most to your business. Figure out what those are and just become religious about tracking those. And become myopic in looking at them, if not daily, weekly, with your management team, your leadership team, and talking about what has to be done on those trends, whether they're good or bad. But I think you've got to find the metrics that make sense for your business, but getting yourself in a position where you're measuring those and looking at those on a regular basis is what's key. I just find that oftentimes in working with our clients, they just sort of have this scattered approach to a lot of metrics, and I don't think they always know which ones really move the needle inside their company. Or they get too focused just on the ones that are up front and really sexy, right? But they don't really understand what's the long tail to this. What's my true lifetime value if I do something different here that affects down here? And I think you've really got to dial in what those are and just become religious and obsessed about tracking those on an ongoing basis. And that's what I find our most successful clients do. And if any of you want to look at or talk about what I see some of the most successful companies track, I'd be happy to have a conversation with you. You can find me after this event. You can email me at steven@quickbox.com, and I'd be happy to go through that with you.
Awesome.
Great.